welcome to meeting number 132 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference on Monday, March 18th, 2024, and the motion adopted on Monday, December 11th, 2024, the committee is meeting to discuss only Part 5 of Bill C-59, an act to implement certain provisions of the full economic statement tabled in Parliament on November 21st, 2023, and certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 28th, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the Standing Order 15.1. Members are attending in person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when the microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Members, before we get to our witnesses today, just a couple of items. One is you would have received a couple of budgets, and just looking around for approval for those budgets. Yes, okay, so those are approved. Thank you for that, and also for Thursday, I know we had sent out a invitation letter to the DPM to appear. The DPM has accepted that and will be appearing before our committee this upcoming Thursday. I do see a hand, MP Zerowitz. I'll just go through quickly, just a few opening remarks so that we can get all our officials set up. So today, to discuss Part 5 of Bill C-59, we welcome 36 department officials. I know many of them were outside going through security. I hope everybody has made it in. They are from the Departments of Finance, Employment and Social Development, Environment, Health, Industry, Justice, along with Canada Border Services Agency, Financial Transactions and Reports and Analysis, Centre of Canada, Treasury Board Secretariat, Office of Infrastructure of Canada, and Service Canada. So please note that all these individuals cannot sit at the table. So we have a number that are at the table. The rest are here in this room. As the members ask their questions, this is for the officials. And if the question pertains to your department and you know, within Section 5, we would ask that you come to the table then to answer those questions. We need you before a mic to be able to do that. So we may have some rotating chairs here in the room as we go through today's questions from the members. Okay. All right. Okay. And also, for the members' sake, we do not have any opening remarks today from our officials, so we will go right into to questions from the members. So, like I said, if someone is not in the room yet, and to the members, and you have a question for that particular department, we'll have to get that in another round as it comes up, and then maybe one of those officials can come up to the mic. And now I will go to MP Zerowitz.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to have interrupted your flow. It's just because you had mentioned the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance coming before this committee on this bill this Thursday. I just thought, given the fact that I understand that the main estimates has also been referred to this committee, if I believe that's right, I wonder, colleagues, should we also hear from the Deputy Prime Minister on the main estimates as well? I know I have some questions on it, so I want to see whether there would be any appetite for that.
I see eager MP Chambers.
I'm sure we have lots of latitude to ask the Deputy Prime Minister questions, but if she would like to stay for another hour, we would be happy to have her.
So not sure how that works, Mr. Chair. Is it that we can ask the Deputy Prime Minister if she's got some additional time? I'm not sure if it's an hour. I'm not sure if it's half an hour. I'm not sure what the time is. That's not for me to decide. But is that something we could do, is ask her whether she has some extra time to be able to also address the main estimates?
We can, yeah, we can reach out.
Okay.
See if that's possible.
Okay, great. Just, you know.
Okay.
Just
Anybody
'cause-
else? Anybody else on that? No. Okay. Okay. And just before we go to officials, yeah, MP Lawrence, you wanted to.
My apologies for breaking protocol here. I'm just going to take 30 seconds, a minute here, and with sadness in my heart, I'm sure that many members have already heard that Kimberly Rudd, she was former member of Parliament from our riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South, has passed away, and so I just wanted to pass on the condolences to her family and reiterate, which I'm sure everyone in Northumberland, Peterborough South knows, that she was dedicated to our community, an entrepreneur, hardworking, and of course she spent a year here on the Finance Committee, so I thought it was fitting to just spend 30 seconds and to pass on my condolences and gratitude for all of her work as the Member of Parliament from Northumberland, Peterborough South. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. Yeah, and on behalf of Finance Committee, our condolences go out to her family and to her friends. And we were all friends, and she had quite an entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm sure is watching us right now. So thank you for that. And on that, we are going to get right into the members' questions. For the officials, how it works is in the first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions, and then subsequent rounds, the timings change a little bit. But in the first round, we're starting with MP Morantz, and MP Morantz will be up for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all being here. I wanted to start by saying at the last meeting, there were many questions that members of this committee had, but unfortunately, we had votes come up during that meeting which seriously abridged our ability to ask questions. So one of my questions, I'm sorry, Mr. It might not be directly related to Part 5, but it has to do with the carbon tax, and given the fact that there are 36 departmental officials here, I'm hoping that there might be one person that has some knowledge of the carbon tax in the group that we have here today. Is that the case?
Yeah, just up front, if we have an official that
Is there
would be
anyone?
best suited to be at the table. No, I guess.
You could say no instead of not saying anything.
Well, and I'll just say for the people, for MP Morantz, the people at the table, the officials at the table, they, like I said, we have a lot of officials here in the room. They're not necessarily the officials that would answer to that, but it doesn't look like we have an official that would be able to take that
How
up.
many officials are there in the?
There's 36 officials are with
in
us.
the department. 1,200. How? 1,200? There's 1,200 officials in the Department of Finance? No.
Okay.
Is
There are
anyone-
36 officials with us here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so there's no one here who could answer a question about the carbon tax. Is that correct? Someone want to say yes? Could you say yes so it's in the record? Yes,
Well,
just say yes.
well,
You don't want to say yes? You
MP
don't want to
Morantz,
speak?
I think, just to.
I just find it astounding.
We don't want to
that
put the
they-
officials in a difficult spot.
36 members of the
The officials
department
will
here.
answer the questions that they can.
Well, I'm asking a question. Is there anyone here who can answer a question about the carbon tax? Looking around, nodding, there's nodding I see in the negative, but no one is actually speaking, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I will move on then. The Cullen Commission found that there was a 5% increase in housing prices due to money laundering in British Columbia. Has the department done any analysis to determine what the effect on housing prices has been across the country?
We do have an official coming to the table.
Some are happy to leave.
I can see that.
Thank you.
Oh.
Kind of, yeah,
Ju-
what
just-
department?
Just before you start, Ms. Hunt, do you know anything about the carbon tax?
I can confirm, no, I do not know anything about the carbon tax.
I appreciate that. That's wonderful, an answer. Okay, great. Okay, tell me about housing prices. Are they affected by money laundering?
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I've appeared in front of this committee before to explain how important the importance the government places on its anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing regime. And certainly we recognize that the housing market in Canada is one where there is risks. related to money laundering and terrorist financing. The government has taken several steps over the last several years to be able to address these risks in the housing market, including a proposal in the Fall Economic Statement of 2023 to include Charlene. Now I'm getting nervous, so I probably shouldn't do this.
That's okay.
To capture title insurers and incorporate them into our anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing regime, as well as enhance the obligations for participants to make sure that we're verifying the identity of unrepresented parties in a transaction.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. But, and just because I have limited time, a fairly simple question, and if you don't have this data, feel free just to say we don't have it. Really, my question is, does the department have any data that would show that money laundering has caused housing prices to increase across the country? Just like the Cullen Report found in Vancouver.
The Cullen Report, and there was another study in the British Columbia that also identified this as a risk. I think there's a general understanding that it's difficult to quantify the potential effect that this would have, but that there is effects of money laundering in the real estate
So yes,
sector.
there is an effect on housing prices. Okay, I have my time I have left. I have a question for the criminal code lady. Which one is? There you are. Okay. It's still okay to say the word lady, I think. But, Ms. Cassidy, why are there amendments to the criminal code in a budget bill?
So I think, as my colleague from the Department of Finance indicated, the government maintains a high priority on its anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing regime, and that regime, which is led by the Department of Financing, includes representatives of various departments and agencies, including
Just down to my
the
last 30
Department of
seconds.
Justice.
I'm really sorry, but these are amendments to the criminal code. Last time I recall this happening, it was to cut a deal for SNC-Lavalin by bringing in amendments to the criminal code and a budget bill that would provide them with an ability to have their prosecutions deferred. So pardon me if I'm a little suspicious of amending the criminal code in the context of a budget bill. So I'm just asking again, shouldn't this be something that is implemented separately in a bill and considered at the Justice Committee, not the Finance Committee?
Thank you for your question. The decision regarding what is included in a finance bill, a budget bill, a fall economic statement bill is made by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister. Thank you.
And now to MP Thompson, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome to committee. I'm going to switch and speak about bereavement and pregnancy loss if I could. I'm not sure who the team this shift is. And clearly, this is very important to many people, and certainly having experienced both. I was really grateful to see some of the changes. Could you discuss how the changes in Bill C-59 better support parents with parental benefits not available to those who experience pregnancy loss? And what the current leave options are and what benefits that they're currently using in place of the specific pregnancy loss benefit.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the question. It's musical chairs this morning, but I'll try to answer the question. So the Government of Canada is committed to protecting and supporting the mental and physical health of workers. Dealing with pregnancy loss can be extremely challenging, and individuals who experience it often need time away from work to support their recovery. To better support federally regulated private sector employees during this difficult time, the government is proposing changes to the Canada Labour Code to provide 3 days of paid leave following a pregnancy loss. In the event of a stillbirth, employees would be entitled to prolong their leave for a period of 8 weeks without pay. So the new leave will provide workers with greater job and income security while they recover. It will be available to the individual who is pregnant, the spouse or common law partner, and any person who intended to be the legal parent of the child, including the biological parent and parents who were planning to have a child through adoption or surrogacy. The leave will be available to individuals who are employed in a federally regulated private sector workplace.
Thank you. I just want to just capture one of the points you referenced. What was the basis for the definition of stillbirth?
So the basis for that is this was actually a subject that was passed in Bill C-3, you may recall. And so that bill was actually received royal assent in 2021. What is here is aligned with Bill C-3, which was never brought into force. So all of the provisions were exactly aligned with that bill.
Thank you, and I was personally very pleased to see that there. Leave related to pregnancy loss and bereavement leave are similar to changes proposed and adopted by New Zealand a few years ago. How have New Zealand parents benefited from this? Are you able to speak to that? And then also, if there are similar shifts in other jurisdictions have made differences for families in the time truly of great loss.
So thank you for the question. Certainly a number of jurisdictions have made changes, similar changes, including a number of provinces in Canada. And certainly what we see is that many parents or would-be parents have benefited from the leave. So pregnancy loss is certainly something that affects many individuals. Having a number of days for them to rest and recover is seen as critical. And so I think this is why the government put forward this perspective.
Thank you, and again, I think it's incredibly important. I don't know if you're able to speak to adoption leave. They say, okay, good. We don't have to.
Actually, we have some others that would come up for adoption leave.
If you wouldn't mind, just because, again, right, it's so important for families.
Of course.
Thank you, and I have a sense that I'm quickly running out of time, so I'll be really quick. If you could speak to the rationale and why you brought forth the EI changes for adoption leave.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So the rationale for bringing forward the 15-week shareable new EI benefit that would support parents who become parents through the process of adoption or through the process of surrogacy, it would respond to a Government of Canada commitment to introduce such a benefit that was outlined in the mandate letter of 2021 for the then Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion. It would also ensure that the EI program continues to be responsive to the different ways in which families are formed, including, as I said, through the many different types of adoption and surrogacy. And it would cover the same types of adoption that are currently covered by EI parental benefits.
Am I good? A little over a minute. Okay, yes. Thank you. I don't know how much I wanted to change the, I'm going to have to actually change the seating again. I'm sorry about that. Just want to run into the Canada's Payment Act and how changes to that deliver faster, more secure options to pay bills, transfer money. Again, it's linked for families, but sorry about the musical chairs.
Is there a particular division or officials that, HOPO officials
I think it's
are...
probably more general, if there's
Yeah.
anyone who wants to take the question.
And I do understand for members and officials, we are losing some time in transition here, so
Thank you.
we will build in some of that time into the members' time. If you could just identify yourself and what department. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Nick Marion. I had the payments policy team at the Department of Finance.
Thank you and welcome. And this is the question is around the Canada Payments Act, and obviously it strengthens Canada's payment system to deliver faster, more secure, and lower cost options to Canadians to pay their bills and transfer money. And how will that change basically benefit Canadians? And obviously it's an important question in light of the challenges so many are facing. So if you could just speak to that, I would be grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. So maybe I can just start with describing the payments modernization program. So the payments modernization has three components. The first being expanding membership eligibility in Payments Canada, which is the subject of the amendments before this committee, as well as establishing the Retail Payment Activities Act regime, which will effectively enable the Bank of Canada to supervise registered payment service providers. And the regime itself, the final regulations have been released in November. Registration of payment service providers will begin in November of this year, with the substantive elements of the regime coming into force in September 2025. So that's the second part of the program. The third part of the Payments Modernization Program is Payments Canada launching the Real-Time REL, which is effectively a new payment system that enables instantaneous, data-rich payments to be exchanged, cleared, and settled instantly, 24/7. And so the purpose of this Payments Modernization Program is to provide new payment options for consumers, for businesses that enable these fast payments, allow new payments participant into the ecosystem, regulated payment participant in the ecosystem, and provide lower cost opportunities, again, for the benefit of Canadian consumers and businesses.
Thompson, and now we're going virtual here to MP Sainte-Marie in the riding of Joliette.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, everybody. Good morning, and thank you to all officials for being here with us. My first questions will deal with amendments to the Competition Act and to the Competition Tribunal Act. So that would be in number 6, Division 6. May I proceed with my questions? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Auger. First of all, the Competition Commissioner sent a letter to the National Finance Committee of the other House. I would imagine the Commissioner is going to send a letter to us as well, and will potentially that's being translated right now. And so the Commissioner is in favor of the amendments to strengthen the Act, but introduces a list of recommendations for review to strengthen and improve the amendments. The list includes 6 recommendations for review, and I would like to know whether you have taken note of these and whether you have any comments to make generally about these 6 recommendations. And if you don't have them, I can read them to you. Thank you, Chair, for the question. I'm Marc Cham, Senior Deputy Minister for Innovation and Innovation Policy and Strategies at Innovation and Economic Development Canada. With me are my colleagues Samir Chhabra and Martin Simard. Regarding the letter by the Competition Commissioner, we considered the recommendations proposed by the Commissioner. Some aspects are not amendments, but simply a consideration for the committee, or perhaps for other bills to come. But concerning these specific recommendations, I would turn the floor over to my colleagues to say a few words about those proposals. I'm Martin Simard. I work under Marc Cham. There are 6 recommendations. I don't know how much time we have. Briefly, I could explain why the government has the bill that was presented and then discuss consideration for this committee. There is a proposal to amend the drip pricing, prices that are changed at the last minute. This was not necessarily in this bill. This was something that dates back 2 years. The recommendation is from 2 years ago, and what Bill 59 is doing is that if there was something that was forgotten or left out, it was simply copying what was there. So the commissioner is proposing changing what was there 2 years ago, but that's why it's not in the bill, in Bill C-59. The idea was that everything to be equal. In terms of greenwashing, this was just a recommendation. There is no proposed change that was specifically made. Regarding the standard pricing, the commissioner was suggesting changing the burden of proof. What the government did in C-59, was to distinguish. There was a difference between the French and the English. And so if somebody was posting a discount, to say that it was a false discount, you had to look at the whole market to know whether it was the average price of sale. So what this bill said was, no, based on the prices of that seller, is this a discount with respect to the previous prices that seller at vendor had posted? The commissioner went further. He said it's the company's responsibility to keep their price list and to prove this. The government didn't go there. It simply said that the basis is the price of the company. And the consideration was for small businesses who don't always have a list of prices would perhaps create a burden for these smaller companies to keep a list of prices. So the commissioner, with its powers of discovery in a process, would be able to obtain a price list. So that's why the government stopped there. I'm going quickly. The commissioner was suggesting that in cases of mergers, to have a default percentage. What the government was doing in C-59 was that before there was a complete prohibition. You couldn't use market shares only. But this has been withdrawn. That barrier was withdrawn, which makes it possible for the tribunal to intuitively infer whether market shares are very high. The commissioner wants to go further and say we're going to put a proportion in the Act. We are not familiar with any country that has a percentage in their law. What 59 is doing is it's aligning with the U.S. and leaving it to the courts and case law. But the commissioner is proposing going further to include a percentage in the legislation. Briefly, essentially, for a merger to be challenged at the competition tribunal, it has to significantly reduce competition. What the commissioner is proposing is that once there's a challenge, if parts of the company are sold, if there's some remedy or solution being proposed, the solution has to completely restore competition. The reason for which the government didn't go there is that right now, to be able to challenge a merger, it has to be significant. It's not clear why the problematic merger solution should have to have zero impact on competition. If the principle is that the impact has to be significant, it should be based on principles, and so the government didn't go there. Again, the commissioner can present their vision. Also, there was doubt about the new certification process for the environmental certification. Why is the government introducing this? Several companies and environmental groups said that it is criminal to band together, to organize together to protect the environment by saying we will no longer sell certain polluting products. So this could be considered to be a criminal cartel. So the idea was to have a pre-authorization system in the competition tribunal. And we would say, okay, this is being done. We would like to come to an agreement together so as to not have a product that's a pollutant. And so there could be a letter saying, okay, you will not risk criminal penalties. The commissioner can explain why he has doubts about this. He's afraid of people hiding behind an environmental argument to create a cartel. The government's opinion is that all of the elements are there. It's at complete discretion of the commissioner. If the commissioner has any doubts, the commissioner can simply not issue the letter. But we've heard from environmental group and companies that it really could be a disincentive to collaboration to promote the environment by having this fear of criminal action. Thank you very much for the clarity of your responses. Most appreciated.
Merci. J'aurai des questions au prochain tour. Merci.
Thank you. I'll save the rest for next round.
Blakey, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with my question about the Competition Bureau provisions, just to save a little bit of time and exercise for officials. I want to ask about the greenwashing provision that's in the Act. I think it talks about ensuring that there are adequate and proper tests for environmental claims about products, but I think folks are concerned that, you know, there are other ways to falsely promote something as being environmental. So, for instance, activities, services, or brand generally. So I'm wondering how product is defined and whether it covers that more broadly, or whether changes would have to be made to the legislation in order to have a more comprehensive prohibition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I'll start and then may turn to my colleagues for supplemental. The entry point for the Competition Act is on the substantial lessening of competition or price competition in the marketplace, and that the deceptive marketing provisions of the Competition Act rest in that assurance that what a consumer is experiencing in the marketplace is not unduly uncompetitive or potentially provides false information about a given transaction. And hence the hard wiring around a product being the transaction that a consumer is potentially undertaking. And so if the product claim that's being made by the organization extends to the point in which there might be deception to the part of the consumer, to the point where it might actually sway their overall choice of the actual transaction, then potentially there's an understanding that that could feed within the conceptions of deceptive marketing when an environmental claim is made. But broad environmental claims that are not specific to the actual transaction, which is the heart of the constitutional underpinning of the Act itself and the enforcement powers of the Bureau, would not necessarily be subject to that because that's not the hard wiring of the Act. The Act is about that transaction and the potential for deception for a consumer in that transaction. So,
aren't you concerned that that's a pretty narrow way of looking at it, though? I mean, if a company is making deceptive claims about its brand and giving consumers the impression that it's a green brand, and using that indirectly to give a kind of green credibility to its products, that's not captured if we look narrowly at the product transaction, but it's certainly part of informing consumer decision making. And so if the point of the legislation is to try and promote honesty within the market and build confidence for consumers that when they're relating to companies that sell them products, that they're getting a pretty above board representation of what they're buying into when they purchase a product, shouldn't we be concerned to have legislation that isn't so narrowly focused on product transactions? And I understand that the European Union, for instance, has a more general application for its anti-greenwashing provisions.
So I'd make 2 points, I guess. One is obviously it's difficult to port other systems into ours, particularly the European Union, where it's able at the Commission level to do things that potentially aren't necessarily into the same federated structure that we possess here within the Canadian Competition Act specifically. I think our view isn't necessarily that there shouldn't be some standards, for instance, around the types of environmental messaging that companies are saying. This relates back to climate disclosures and climate reporting, which is work that's also underway within both our department and the Department of ECCC, where I think there can be greater standardization around environmental messaging without necessarily trying to get outside of the remit of the Competition Act. And I think that's where we would probably differ, which is to say, within the guise of the Competition Act and its constitutional underpinnings in the trade and commerce power, we are about that transaction and we are about that deception.
Am I hearing you right? That are you suggesting that there's a constitutional objection to the idea of including activities or brands within the scope of the prohibition of the Competition Act? And if so, I guess my question is, what is the basis for that constitutional objective? And secondly,
let's say, point granted about the Competition Act for the sake of argument, are there other legislative vehicles or other places where such a prohibition could be put into federal legislation that would cover that expanded anti-greenwashing concept?
So I'd make two general points, Mr. Chair. One, the capacity for us to regulate anti-competitive conduct is premised on a particular division of powers, in the sense that product regulation specifically and a number of other specific regulations are often shared jurisdiction with provinces and territories. And so we rest within the capacity to be able to limit the significant lessening of competition and potential deception.
Can you point us to the section, so that if we want
I'd have
to go
to come back to you on the
okay,
section.
That would be helpful if you could.
And then in terms of broader legislative efforts, I think this is where climate disclosure reporting and other aspects of regulating the information about environment claims is actually a part and parcel of the broader effort to potentially not just say, about a specific product where it says it's 35% more green than its competitor, but actually on broader claims like we're really good for the environment or our company is doing great things in the environment. Those types of broad claims are best understood within the environment understanding in terms of the actual technical understanding, which is not within the remit of the Competition Bureau.
Okay, thank you for that conversation. Do I have time to ask a question on something else?
Well, then we will have a transition, so yeah, I will take up.
Okay, my next question, Mr. Chair, in the next spot will be on the Canada Water Agency. So when Monsieur Saint-Marie is asking his questions, very shortly, I'll need those officials.
Yeah, officials, be ready. Yep, okay, great. And that, so now we're actually transitioning into our second round. So as we go into our second round, just for the officials, the times are a little bit different. We're going to start with MP Chambers. MP Chambers, you got 5 minutes to
Thank you very much,
ask your
Mr.
questions.
Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you to all our officials. And while Ms. Hunt is getting ready and prepared, I want to apologize on behalf of the government for delaying the budget. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to do it, and work expands to fill the time available. And an extra few weeks is very difficult, I know. So, sorry. Hopefully, in future, we'll have fixed budget dates, and we can all know when they will be. Ms. Hunt, thank you very much. Nice to see you again. Do you remember Bill 289? It was a private member's bill that proposed to amend the criminal code and related to money laundering. Correct? You're nodding. You're nodding yes. One of the arguments the government used to defeat that bill was that they did not enjoy or they did not recommend making changes to the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act and the Criminal Code outside of the 5-year review of that legislation. So my first question is, does Bill C-59 amend the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act?
The answer to your question, thank you, Chair, is yes, it does amend the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act.
Thank you very much. Does it also amend the criminal code as it relates to money laundering?
The answer to the question, Chair, is yes, it does.
I'm just puzzled because the government said that it couldn't support a private member's bill previously because it amended an act that it said we should do the 5-year review on. Have we started, to your knowledge, has any committee undertaken of the required statutory review of the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act?
My understanding is that we have had an introductory meeting on that with this committee, and we await further guidance from this committee on the review of the parliamentary review of the act.
But there's no committee actually that has undertaken and passed a study to do that review, correct? We've had an introductory meeting, but currently there's no committee that's been assigned that duty. Would you say that's fair?
Chair, I am not a parliamentary affairs expert. I will be honest with you. You probably know the answer to this question better than I do, but to my knowledge, I do not believe that has been formally passed.
Thank you very much. And do you know when we were supposed to start that review?
The last review took place in 2018, and the Act proposes a review every 5 years.
Okay, that would be 2023. We're now in 2024. So we've actually missed the deadline. Is Canada not up for review under the Financial Action Task Force? Are they not coming to do a bit of a review of the country to see how we're doing on money laundering?
Yes, Canada will undertake its mutual evaluation by the Financial Action Task Force. It will begin in 2025.
Right. But we've missed the statutory review, by which we're supposed to review. So we're going to actually start that with a bit of a black mark because we actually haven't kept up to the statutory requirement, correct? Like, that's what one of the things they would look at is whether Parliament's actually fulfilling its obligations under the current money laundering regime, correct?
The review looks at how Canada is faring against 40 different technical requirements and 11 broad kind of efficiency regulations. The government has made many changes and improvements over the last several years, and obviously those changes and the effectiveness of our regime will be looked at from a broad-based perspective.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I continue on this line, I'd like to point out I don't believe there's any officials from CRA here today, and I don't believe there were any officials from CRA at the last review. My understanding, after having consulted the Senate pre-study hearings on the same bill, is that CRA is actually tabbed with auditing. So I would request that we put the CRA for future witness as part of the pre-study. And since I'm in a very giving mood, I've put a motion on notice. I won't move it, but I put a motion on notice. I'll quickly read into the record to help the government on its review of Proceeds, Crime and Money Laundering Act. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082, with regards to Section 72 of the Proceeds, Crime and Money Laundering Act, that this committee undertake a review of the Proceeds, Crime and Money Laundering Act, calls the following witnesses: the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of National Revenue, the Public Safety Minister, and a number of departments, including the RCMP, FINTRAC, Canadian Securities Intelligence Service, Canada Border Services Agencies, OSFI, the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, the Cullen Commission Lead Counsel, a number of the 5 large financial institutions, the Ontario Securities Commission, and other witnesses as submitted by the members of this committee, and that the committee spend no fewer than 10 meetings on this very important motion. Now, I'm deciding not to move that. I'm just putting it on notice. I provided in advance to the committee clerk, and I believe the translators have it. And so it will be available, I think, either in your inboxes now or very shortly. So thank you very much for your time, and we have additional questions, and we'll speak to some of your colleagues later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, MP Chambers. And yes, it has been distributed to all members. You shall have received it. Thank you, Clerk. And now to MP Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I do want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. And for ease sake, maybe we can, I'll ask some questions of our witnesses that are sitting down here, and really appreciate the renewed interest of our Conservative Party members on this committee to look into money laundering, because unfortunately it was the budget cuts that Stephen Harper brought in that cut $500 million from the unit, the Integrated Proceeds of Crime units, that helped create the conditions that we see today with money laundering, and actually as part of the Cullen Commission that was identified as one of the factors that led to the amount of money laundering we're seeing in real estate. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes since then. Great to see that the province of BC has brought in a land ownership registry and just recently announced that they're going to make it free for individuals to access it. And of course, over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of very important changes that have been made to our anti-money laundering regime, including in Bill C-59. So I was hoping the witnesses might be able to share with this committee how Bill C-59 is going to improve the operational effectiveness of our AML regime, and specifically how it's going to address some of the ongoing enforcement issues that have been identified within the regime.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that question. I'm happy to walk through some of the areas that will be put forward in this bill. So it covers operational effectiveness is obviously a broad consideration, and so I would like to talk through a little bit about the different elements of the bill, because I do think they will all contribute to operational effectiveness. The proposal would help combat sanctions evasion, which is something that we see is a growing concern, particularly with emerging from Russia's unjust war on Ukraine. And this will allow for better information gathering and for our colleagues at the Financial Action of FINTRAC to be able to provide intelligence, both tactical and strategic, to the enforcement partners and others to better combat sanctions evasion. There are changes to the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act, but also to the Customs Act to better enable our colleagues at CBSA to identify and pursue more effectively trade-based money laundering, which is one of the largest ways that money is laundered internationally. And so this will provide additional tools to CBSA to be able to do that. It also will capture white label ATMs, which are ATMs that are not belonging to a bank or a credit union. That's about half the ATMs in Canada, and these are seen as a very high risk for money laundering and terrorist financing. It will also enable additional information sharing. We spoke about environmental considerations earlier. Environmental crime is obviously a very lucrative crime, one of the most lucrative crimes internationally. And this will allow FINTRAC to be able to share intelligence directly with ECCC, so Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as the Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, so that they can leverage this information in their activities enforcing environmental and other related standards.
Thank you for that. And beyond the changes that you mentioned with the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing and Customs Act as well, there are some changes that are made to the criminal code as well, particularly because these are offenses that are very difficult to prove when you need to prove knowledge of some of these things. So I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit to that and how some of those standards are going to be addressed through Bill C-59 as well.
Excellent. I will turn this over to my colleague from Justice Canada, as she is best placed. The other Erin at the table is better placed to respond.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for the question. So Bill C-59 proposes 3 types of amendments to the criminal code that are intended to address operational aspects of the anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing regime. So the first proposed amendment targets the laundering of proceeds of crime offense. What we have heard through our consultations and our engagement with provincial and territorial partners is that offense is particularly challenging to prosecute and to obtain sufficient evidence to go to prosecution because, among other things, the offense requires that the accused have knowledge, belief, or is reckless as to whether the property was obtained or derived from the commission of a designated offense. And in the case of money laundering committed by third parties, so persons who are not engaged in the underlying offense that gave rise to the proceeds, it can be particularly challenging to establish that mental element, that knowledge or belief or recklessness. So the amendments propose to some changes specifically to address third-party money laundering, and that would enable, they establish a statutory inference.
Ms. Cassidy, I'm going to interject. You're
Yes.
going to have to be very quick, very brief. We're already past the time, but I know you had a few amendments that you said, but you're going to have to be very quick. Thanks.
Absolutely. So statutory inference that may be drawn, and in addition, some changes to the extent to which the details that must be established in relation to the predicate offence. The second amendments will streamline and modernize certain aspects of the seizure and restraint of proceeds of crime provisions. And then the third amendment will address a production order for financial information to better respond to digital assets, cryptocurrency. Thank you.
And thank you, MP Weiler. And now we're going to MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, mes...
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be looking again at the Competition Act section, Division 6. I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Roger, from transmitting the Commissioner's letter as quickly as possible. We have the best clerk of any committee in the House and of the other House as well. So for Mr. Simard, I'd expect something about C-59 to limit the time of our study. We'll be inviting the Commissioner and other organizations. It may be that we suggest amendments, that there are some amendments suggested for C-59. If you were to have any other additional elements to convey to us before we vote on the recommendations, please keep this in mind. Following the testimony of the Commissioner and other witnesses so that we can make a fully enlightened decision. Now I'd like to get back to the second recommendation about greenwashing. Our colleague Daniel Blakey made some mention of this. Various organizations have consulted us and contacted us to suggest that the greenwashing under the Competition Act should apply to indications of a company generally for the environment. For example, allegations regarding the sustainability of activities. Could you give us your comments about that, given this potential recommendation or a recommended amendment? Thank you for the question. I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleagues, my colleague Martin, who can continue the answer. Mr. Sean already mentioned this to a certain extent. We talked about the legal aspect. The government wanted to use all available tools to fight greenwashing. There was a pre-existing mechanism in the Competition Act by which if you affirm a given product or transaction, for example, you say that it washes whiter than what the competition can do, you have to have tested it, you need to have proof. So the government used that pre-existing tool and said, okay, we'll apply it if you say it's greener, because whiter affects the consumer. I bought a product, it was supposed to make something whiter, and it's not making it whiter. But if it's something that's polluting a lake, it's not against an individual consumer. So a product has to be tested. Is there phosphorus? Is there no phosphorus? Or phosphates? When you say that you're dealing with a green company, there's no pre-existing mechanism. For example, if you say, I am fair, my company is fair, or we treat our employees well, there's all kinds of information you can state, but there's no pre-existing mechanism for prior proof. There's a general statement that you are not allowed to make false representation. So the government stopped there because there is a mechanism working with the Competition Act, and now we're straying from that and making more general affirmations. Mr. Sean mentioned that there's a practical aspect. What am I supposed to test to say if I'm greener? If I'm greener in one way, is that enough to make a general statement? The Competition Act is a general act that applies to everyone. It doesn't go sector by sector. In some countries, even in Canada, when you talk about plastics, there are more specific recommendations to have the recycle symbol. Here are the conditions. There are other more sectoral greenwashing provisions. We can say my company is carbon-free or zero emissions. In annual reports, for example, there are stipulations now. There may be other tools to fight specific issues related to greenwashing. The Competition Act is perhaps a limited tool for this kind of a general statement. I'm greener. What am I supposed to test? Thank you. I'll have other questions for my next round.
And now to MP Blakey.
Thank you very much. So my question is for folks about the Canada Water Agency.
We have a transition.
Thank you, Ms. Bogue. I understand the government has announced that the new headquarters for the Canada Water Agency will be in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I see that that's not specifically in the legislation, so I wanted confirmation today that that is indeed the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the legislation indicates that the headquarters will be designated by Order in Council. And in Budget 2023, which you probably saw, the government indicated that the plan is to set up the headquarters in Winnipeg.
Thank you very much. And is there any statutory funding for the new Canada Water Agency, or is that all going to be done on an ad hoc basis through appropriations?
So there's a combination of existing funding for activities that are taken care of by Environment Climate Change Canada now that will be moving into the agency. And then Budget 2023, as you may have seen, announced additional funding that would also be for the Canada Water Agency. So including $85 million over 5 years and $21 million ongoing to create the Canada Water Agency, and a total investment of $650 million over 10 years for investments in 8 water bodies across the country. The Canada Water Agency would deliver the majority of that investment in water bodies.
So how much of that funding would be statutory, as in it's in the legislation for the Canada Water Agency and it's regular without the government having to come back to Parliament? And how much of that funding would be in the estimates, approved through the estimates process every year?
I'll have to go back on the specifics of that, but a fair portion would be coming through the estimates. Yeah.
Okay. And then what kind of mandate change is coming with the establishment of the Canada Water Agency as an independent agency, and what can Canadians expect in terms of government water policy and changes to it through the new organizational structure, or is it or are things largely just going to be the same? Perhaps you could explain some of the differences that you're anticipating.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, it's a good question. There are over 20 different departments and agencies in the federal government, as you may know, that have a responsibility for freshwater-related activities. And in the proposed legislation, the Canada Water Agency would assist the Minister of Environment with the Minister of Environment's freshwater-related responsibilities. And more specifically, the mandate of the agency would be to work to improve freshwater management in Canada by providing leadership, effective collaboration federally with those 20-plus federal organizations, and improved coordination and collaboration with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples to proactively address national and regional.
So what would be some of the mechanisms by which the new Canada Water Agency will achieve that better collaboration that haven't been deployed in the current structure?
So the federal government already has strong relationships with provinces and territories in some of those 8 water bodies that I mentioned earlier. That will be a main focus for the agency's activities, we now have a larger investment in those water bodies, particularly the Great Lakes, that will be advancing very much in collaboration with provincial and territorial partners. So I would say that's where you're going to see some of the more significant investment, very much building on existing collaborative, highly functional relationships between.
Am I to understand?
Well over, but yeah, the next round. So we're off to MP Lawrence now for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And my questions will be with respect to Part 5, Division 11. So if Mr. Peets and Ms. Bolt could take the microphone, that would be amazing. So while you sit down, perhaps I'll just give a little bit of preamble for my question. So my understanding is that Division 11 enacts the Department of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities Act, which is to create a new federal bureaucracy that is taking over some of the responsibilities from the previous administration. So what's the total cost of creating this new bureaucracy?
Thanks for the question. The Act is creating departmental legislation for the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. And this is a transformation of the existing Department of Infrastructure Canada. So the Department of Infrastructure Canada has existed since 2002 by order in council, and this legislation provides a legislative basis. But that's not all it does. It also puts housing, infrastructure, and communities from a mandate perspective together. So part of that happened with the movement of staff from the Department of ESDC, Employment Social Development Canada, to Infrastructure Canada who are responsible for homelessness policy.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the background. That was valuable. But what's the total cost of the change?
This isn't about, there's no revenue associated with this bill. It's about mandate, and it's about responsibilities of the new department.
So there'll be no additional cost because of the changes that are proposed in Division 11?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. How many new houses will be created because of this change?
Well, what this bill does is not about program interventions. It's not about measures to kind of introduce new spending.
With respect, it's one of the aims is to advance public infrastructure and housing outcomes. So the reason why we're doing this is presumably to build more homes. Is that not correct?
I think one of the distinctions that I'd like to make is between the creation of a department with a certain mandate, and which is, according to this legislation, will persist and will, provide the basis upon which governments of the day will institute their policies related to infrastructure and housing, and those policies themselves.
Yes,
so this is about the framework and the government.
I'm aware of that, but the reason why we put the framework in place is to build more houses. Is that not correct? Whether those be subsidized or private sector or affordable or unaffordable housing, the idea is to build more houses. So I'm asking a very simple question. How many more houses will be built by 2030 because of these changes?
So that's a question that relates to government policy and program interventions as opposed to
why are we
the
doing
legislation.
Why are we making this change?
Why we're making this change, why the government is making this change or proposing this change, is to bring together things that are related, and that things where you can add value by treating things like infrastructure, like communities, like housing.
Is not one of the outcomes to build more houses? Is that not one of the things we want to get done with this change?
So what this legislation does is it puts the department on a footing to advance government priorities, and one of the government's priorities is...
Very simple question. How many more houses will be built in 2026 because of this change?
This bill is about putting a framework in place.
I just want a number. If you don't know, say I don't know.
It's
just a number.
I don't know a specific number, but this is not the goal of the bill. The goal of the bill is to create the framework upon which government policies and programs...
So the goal is not to build more houses. That's not part of this change.
This bill is about putting the tools in place so that the department can then exercise the policies of the government.
I understand that it's about putting the framework, but you're presumably putting gas in the car to drive it, right? Like we're putting in a plan to build more houses, and I'm asking a very simple question for the taxpayers of Canada: how many more houses will be built because of this? You've got to have some type of estimate. Why would you do this if you have no measurable outcome?
Measurable outcomes are associated with program interventions and policies and various budget decisions.
Okay, thank you. It's clear to me that this program exists to build bureaucracy and not build more homes. I've given you multiple chances, and I'll give you one last opportunity. We've established it's going to build a new bureaucracy. We've done that. This government's great at building bureaucracy, but you haven't given me one number. Can you table something with this committee as to any measurable result that will come from these changes?
The reason I'm having a challenge answering your question is because you're linking the policy outcome with the legislation, and the legislation
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Mr. Chair, I'm really sorry. This would, in the court of law, would be called badgering the witness. He's not allowed to answer the question, and then when he's not giving the answer he was looking for, he's saying that he's trying to stop answering. He's saying that he's not able to give a response, not because he doesn't have one. It's not in his jurisdiction.
I do hear what you're saying, MP Zarowitz.
A little bit of respect, please.
I'd say yes. I do. Yeah. Thank you, MP Baker. MP Lawrence. The time is up anyway, MP Lawrence, but we do want to be very respectful, here at committee with our officials. The officials are here. They have a great deal of knowledge. They want to impart that knowledge on our committee, for our analysts, for us to be able to do our work. And so we do ask for that respect and decorum within our committee. So we thank you for that, and thank you, MP Lawrence, where your time is up. And now we're on to MP Baker, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to ask for the folks who are speaking about money laundering to come up and speak. And while you're doing that, I've got a few things I'll say. First of all, a big thank you to all of you for being here. I understand there's 36 of you. I don't think I've seen this many folks in a committee meeting before, so thank you all for taking the time to be here. And I know not all of you will get a chance to answer questions. Maybe you'll be happy about that, maybe you won't be happy about that, but either way, we thank you for making the time to be here to answer those questions. And I'd also like to say thank you for all of your work on an ongoing basis on behalf of Canadians, because you do a tremendous amount. Everything that government does, or a lot of what government does, everything government does relies on civil servants like yourselves who are working behind the scenes and aren't necessarily known to Canadians. So thank you to you and your colleagues for all of your work. The second thing I'll say is that I'd like to put a motion on notice. So I apologize to our witnesses for a moment. And I'm going to ask my team to circulate that to the clerk. Should we take a minute?
To the clerk?
Yeah. Should I wait, Chair, or should I?
You can send it to the clerk right now if you have it.
Have we sent it? We've sent it. We're waiting for the translation.
Okay, we have received it, and he'll distribute to members. Okay, go ahead.
It is translated.
Is it translated? It is translated, yes. Okay, we do have it in both languages. If you could just send that to the members, just give them.
Just let me know, Chair, when we're ready.
Okay.
While we're doing that, I'll just make a few quick comments. Ms. Hunt, you spoke about how when you were testifying in the last round with Mr. Chambers, you spoke about that at one point you said you suppose that Mr. Chambers knew the answer to better the answer to your question than you did. And I will tell you something about Adam Chambers, is that he very rarely asks a question he doesn't already know the answer to. Sometimes we're privileged enough that he will share the answer with us. Sometimes he holds it back, sometimes he shares it. So that's the first thing. But good intuition on your part, I would say. The second thing is Mr. Chambers' motion put a motion on notice. I know we're not debating the motion. I'm just using the time that I have here, but that was quite a long list of witnesses, Mr. Chambers, that I think you have more than half of cabinet in that motion. So I think if we were to pass that motion, I think we'd have even more people in the room than we had today, and I think today was a record. So, Mr. Chair, are we ready?
MP Baker, everybody should have received it already, and in your inbox.
Okay. So I'll just read it into the record, Chair,
if you can. Thank you.
That in accordance with its motion adopted on January 30th, 2024, the Chair be instructed to schedule meetings for the consideration of Bill C-59 upon the bill's referral to committee, that clause by clause consideration of the bill start no later than April 30th, 2024, following a total of 20 hours of witness testimony. For the purposes of this study, that the Chair be empowered to set up extended meetings and request additional House resources if necessary.
Thank you, MP Baker.
Okay. How much time do I have, Chair?
You've got about almost 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
So on the issue of money laundering, just for my constituents who are watching at home, like stepping back from legislation for a second, okay? So how does money laundering, there are a number of measures in the legislation to combat money laundering. I think what I want to help, I would like to understand better, and I'd like my constituents to understand better, is how does money laundering harm Canadians? What problem are we trying to solve?
Excellent. Thank you very much for the question. That's an excellent question. And I think one where we often think of money laundering as a victimless crime. But let me be clear, and on the record, it is not a victimless crime. What we're talking about when we talk about money laundering is how criminals try to take their proceeds of crime and make them seem legitimate. These are proceeds that are generated from crimes such as human trafficking, drug trafficking, environmental crimes where they're deterring environmental protections for Canadians that can have real-life impacts on our health and safety. This is trade-based money laundering, so trying to hide the value of their crimes within the international trading system. And this is generating and helping them generate more proceeds to be able to perpetuate even further crimes. These are things we need to stop. Canada has a very involved and developed system to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. It involves 13 departments and agencies at the federal level, our provincial and territorial colleagues, as well as nearly 30,000 reporting entities that are all involved in trying to identify suspicious transactions and suspicions and report them to our FinTrack, our Financial Intelligence Unit, to allow our enforcement agencies to better identify, deter, and detect money laundering throughout our country.
When you talk about the fact that money laundering allows some of these criminals to then fund and resource other criminal activity, like just for the folks in Etobicoke that I represent, like what kinds of criminal activity are we talking about that might impact my constituents?
So money laundering, thank you very much for the question. Money laundering, I think, affects all sorts of different criminal activities, both small criminals, but also large criminal organizations. And so this would be funding all small criminal acts, which could be any variety of criminal acts. It's the act of taking the criminal proceeds and trying to make them legitimate. And in doing that, you are allowing the criminals to continue to perpetuate crimes.
And could it be things like, could those resources be used to perpetrate car thefts, for example?
Obviously, I think the answer to that question is criminal proceeds can be used to direct any type of other criminal acts within our country, including things like car thefts.
Yeah. So it could impact. I appreciate each criminal entity, each criminal and each criminal organization is different and perpetrates different types of crimes, but it could result in things like, or presumably there are some people who are using laundered money to fund and facilitate car thefts and break-ins and other forms of serious crime that affect folks every day. Is that a fair assumption?
I would maybe, if I could answer your question slightly differently, I think car thefts, for example, is a way to generate proceeds of crime, and therefore the way that you would wash that money to try to make it clean is a way to launder your money. And so that's kind of the network and nexus in which we're working.
So by doing this, we can actually limit car thefts.
Yeah, just answer it quickly and then
yes,
we'll
I think we all hope that we can limit car thefts.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for that, MP Baker. And now we're actually moving into our third round, and we've got MP Howland up now.
Thanks, Chair. Can I call the infrastructure, please? Thanks, folks. I just wanted to continue the questioning by my colleague, Mr. Lawrence. I'll ask one more time. With this legislation, C-59, the FES, is there any analysis on how many homes this legislation will build?
I really am conscious of the spirit of the question, and also that my answers could be repetitive.
Is the number zero?
But this legislation is about creating a department, not about the programs that the department runs.
And how many billions of dollars have they committed to supposedly building homes faster?
The National Housing Strategy would be... I'm sorry, I'm prepared to speak to the legislation, and so I don't have the familiarity with CMHC's existing programs, which is the Crown Corporation.
I think you were looking for a number. How many billions were committed?
I don't have access to that number right now, but we can make sure to follow up on that. Thank you for the question.
The reason why I ask is because the finance minister said with Bill C-59 or the FES that they were putting billions into building new homes. That's what the point of this was, according to her. She also said that we will unlock billions of dollars to unlock more homes, get more homes built faster. Are you saying that this legislation doesn't do any of that?
I think the finance minister is talking about the various programs and initiatives that the government has put in place to build more homes, including incentives for creating new purpose-built rental, including tax incentives to make the math work better for builders. This legislation is about reassigning mandates within existing federal departments. It has no financial implications. It doesn't cost anything. It moves responsibilities from one department to another, and it provides the department that can then move forward with policies in the future.
But this specifically doesn't build any homes.
So I'm just saying, NPL, I know the question's been asked a number of times. The officials are here to answer. They have answered the question a number of times, so that's the answer.
I've never been, interrupted by the chair before like that, so I'll move on. Are there any officials here? I know we have more than 35 officials here. Have any officials done any analysis on this Bill C-59 if the measures would lower grocery prices, like what the exact number is? Anybody? See the officials getting up and leaving? I just need a number on how much this legislation would lower the grocery prices.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Like my colleague, the changes to the Competition Act empower our Commissioner of Competition and give for a more robust competitive environment within the Canadian marketplace. It's not specific to any one sector, but we do believe that it will have positive impacts on competition, including prices. But there's not a specific number I'm able to provide as to.
But there's no proof that it will lower prices.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe you'll see that there's quite a bit of evidence that competition aids in lowering prices and offering choices to consumers and Canadians, and that this bill significantly improves our overall competition framework, which we believe will have a positive impact for consumers and Canadians in all sectors, but including those in the grocery sector.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move a motion right now that given that A, the carbon tax increases the cost of food, B, Canadians are already set to spend an additional $700 on groceries this year. C, increased food costs are driving Canadians to food banks in record numbers. D, there are now 8,000 members of the Dumpster Diving Network of Toronto Facebook group. E, increasing the carbon tax on April 1st, 2024 will only make food prices even more expensive. In order to help Canadians afford groceries and reduce reliance on food banks, the committee call on the Liberal government to cancel the 23% carbon tax increase on April 1st, 2024, and report this recommendation to the House. I believe that this was put on notice on Friday.
Yeah, it was put on notice on Friday. It is it is after the 48 hours, so it's admissible in members on this motion.
So, Chair, I'll continue.
Yep. Okay. NPL.
As we all know, this carbon tax scam puts less back into Canadians' pockets than what they pay into it. Proven by the PBO, the budgeting watchdog, again confirmed yesterday in committee that the indirect costs put less in Canadians' pockets. It also has done nothing to reduce emissions, and that was proven by the government's own environmental department that said they don't even track the emissions, so they don't even know if this is effective at all. We know that Canadians are visiting food banks in record numbers, 2 million a month to be exact, and Second Harvest says that this year there's going to be 1 million more on top of that will visit a food bank in a single month. A third of those are children. There's a new phenomenon in Canada where double-income earning families are going to food banks more than ever before. We have also heard that people have asked for medical assistance in dying just because they're hungry. 8,000 people in a Facebook group talking about dumpster diving because of the cost of food, the cost of gas, and the cost of groceries and home heating. Seniors having to turn down their heat and use blankets because they can't afford to eat and heat their homes or keep a roof over their heads. And after 8 years of this government, they want to hike that tax 23%
Mr. Chair,
on
point
April
of order.
1st.
Is this a presentation of a motion or is this an oratorical speech?
The member has the floor. MP Helen is speaking to his motion.
Thank you for the ruling, Chair.
Yeah.
23%, they're going to hike that tax. It's an April Fool's joke, but it's on Canadians. Canadians will have to pay this cost because this government doesn't understand that the farmer gets taxed, the trucker gets taxed, the retailer gets taxed, and that tax gets passed down to the buyer ultimately. And right now, Canadians are suffering. This government raised payroll taxes, which means they take more money from Canadians because of this government and its spending. Rents and mortgages have doubled. More of people's monthly income goes towards shelter and leaves them less and less with food. That is why Canadians are the most indebted households in the G7. That is why their delinquencies are going up for mortgages and credit card delinquencies. And that is why Canada is the most at risk in the G7 for mortgage default crisis. And the Liberal NDP government thinks it's a great idea to hike that tax 23%, to take even more. It's all economic pain and no environmental gain for anybody. And this government still wants to continue down with that on their path to quadruple the carbon tax, when they promised it would not go as high as that they're taking it. They actually said that in their last in the last election, that they wouldn't make it go higher. And after they got Canadians' votes, now they're going after Canadians' pocketbooks even further. This is the record after 8 years of the Liberal NDP government. So once again, we call on this government to spike the hike, axe the tax, scrap the carbon tax scam, leave the money in the pockets of hardworking, struggling Canadians after 8 years of this government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, MP Helen. I do have a list here. I've got MP Blakey and then MP Chambers.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased just to take a moment to address the motion. You know, obviously there's been a lot of talk about the carbon tax on Parliament Hill for some time now, and I think it's important to note that I do think that there are some falsehoods about the narrative around the carbon tax and inflation. Now, it is a difficult time for Canadians. That's why New Democrats have been focused on trying to make life more affordable for Canadians. We've tried to expand access to dental care in Canada, for instance. We have worked to press this government to reduce childcare costs. We recently announced an agreement to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And we've also proposed direct tax relief. In fact, we got the government to 2 times double the GST rebate. And why that was important as opposed to a general tax measure, if you look at the carbon tax, actually the people who pay the most carbon tax are the highest earners in Canada. Reducing the carbon tax means giving a tax break to the people who have the most disposable income. And to the extent that you give more disposable income to people at the top of the income scale, what you're doing is putting more money in the economy. Now, last time I listened to a Conservative, they said that was a terrible idea because that was driving inflation. That's why targeted tax relief at the people who need the help the most, which was the GST rebate, and that's something the government should continue to do. We've advocated doubling the GST rebate again, because that kind of targeted tax relief puts money in the pockets of Canadians who need it without putting more money in the pockets of Canadians at the top of the income scale, who presumably will spend that money on other things and help contribute to a higher rate of inflation. We've also proposed to take the GST off home heating, something that we've proposed as an amendment to Conservative motions about the carbon tax that they've refused. Why do we think that's a good idea? Because that kind of tax relief would help Canadians that are struggling to heat their homes, but that would include Canadians that are heating their homes with emissions-free electricity, like most people in Manitoba, for instance, who use electric heat. Well, they don't have emissions with that electric heat. And so taking the GST off home heating is a way to not just reduce the tax on home heating that burns carbon, but to reduce the tax on all kinds of home heating. And furthermore, it would apply right across the country, because people in BC, actually it was a Liberal come Conservative government that introduced a carbon tax in BC. It was the first in the country. They're not going to get any relief if the federal backstop doesn't go up, because it doesn't apply in BC. That's true for folks in Quebec as well. The GST does apply right across the country, but we don't hear them talking about that. We just hear them talking about the carbon tax. So there are ways that New Democrats have proposed meaningful tax relief in a way that would be less inflationary than what the Conservatives are proposing. There are ways that we propose tax relief that would actually help more Canadians than what the Conservatives are proposing. And we've heard many times around this table that the problem with inflation is certainly not just the carbon tax. In fact, it's a relatively small amount of the inflation that's going on. We've heard about supply chains. We've heard about other important contributors to inflation, including a number of studies, and we've heard from some of the very economists who authored those studies, and the Conservatives have an opportunity to cross-examine them, that says that over 25% of inflation in Canada has been caused by price increases that go above and beyond the increase in input costs that companies have experienced. They're not talking about corporate greed. So I'm not prepared to support a motion that is about distracting from the fact that big corporations in Canada are fleecing Canadians and not doing anything about it. And I'm not interested in promoting tax relief that is actually less targeted to the people who need it, more likely to increase inflation, and that doesn't apply to the kinds of home heating that aren't part of the problem when it comes to Canada getting its emissions under control. So that's why I think this motion is a farce, and I'm not prepared to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Blakey. I do have MP Chambers, then MP Zerowitz.
I just wanted to quickly just get on the record as the last time I'll be probably maybe one of the last times I follow an impassioned speech by my colleague, Mr. Blakey. But I have other questions for these witnesses, so I hope we can get to a vote relatively quickly. But I would say perhaps for a future NDP member on the committee, I'd be open to a study on corporate greed. I think there's some good literature on the subject, and we will very much welcome the opportunity to explore that area with the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chambers, MP Zerowitz, then MP Morantz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'll speak very quickly because I'm next up to speak. So I want to ask the witnesses some of our questions, a few questions. But because what Mr. Hallam is saying is a lot of it is deliberate disinformation, so deliberately not saying truthful things, and I'm sure he's going to be posting it on his website.
Point of order,
Mr. Chair.
Point of order, MP Chambers.
I just might check the rules related to parliamentary language and accusations.
Not a point of order. Oh, is it? Okay, that one is. Okay.
MP Zerowitz, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't know if you had more to say, Mr. Chambers. Look, I just wanted to be put on the record that, last week I happened to have Minister Wilkinson in my riding, and this question actually came up from a Davenport resident, whether or not the carbon tax is a really bad thing, given the fact that life is really tough for Canadians right now. And his deliberate answer is this, and I think it's important to put on the record: putting a price on pollution, aka the carbon tax, is the most economically efficient way to reduce carbon emissions. If you ask 100 economists, 99.5 will tell you that is true. And the way we have structured this price on pollution is that we did it in a way that will make it affordable for 8 out of 10 Canadian families, where they will get more money back than where they pay. And it works directly proportionate to their income. So those that live on the most modest means get more money back than they actually pay. And I think it's really important for us to put that on the record, Mr. Chair. And then maybe at this point, just because I want to go back to our witnesses, I'd like to call for a vote.
Yeah, we still have a speaking order.
Okay.
MP Zerowitz,
Okay.
yeah. So I've
Thank
got
you.
MP Morantz up next.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just want to express my concern that Ms. Zerowitz is deliberately providing disinformation to this committee.
How's that?
She's saying that Canadians get back from the carbon tax more than they pay, but we know that that's simply not true. Deliberate disinformation, Mr. Chair, deliberate disinformation from Liberal MPs at this committee. Deliberate disinformation. It's very, very concerning. The Parliamentary Budget Officer put out a report which makes it very clear that Canadians pay more in carbon tax than they get back. And I would ask you to enforce the rules around truthful testimony at this committee. And one other thing, just, only because Mr. Blakey raised this issue with how much the carbon tax contributes to inflation. Now, the bank governor was here saying it contributes 0.6% to inflation, but that's going to go up by 1.15 on April 1st because of the increase. So it'll be 0.6 plus 0.15. Now, The inflation rate is 3.9%, and just recently, the governor of the Bank of Canada said he was holding interest rates fast. I would love to ask him next time he's here, and I will ask him, if the carbon tax didn't exist, the inflation rate would have been then, by his own numbers, 3.3%. I think at 3.3%, he would have reduced rates during the last economic policy report. I'll leave that thought with the committee, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Morantz. I don't have anybody else on the... Okay. Oh, MP Lawrence, I apologize.
I'll be quick. Thank you. I just want to go over carbon tax math. Myself and Governor Macklin have done this a number of times, yet unfortunately it continues to get demagogued and misinformation out there. So I'm just going to do the numbers, and all my numbers will be cited to the Bank of Canada and the Governor, Tiff Macklin. You can look it all up. So currently, the rate of inflation in Canada, the headline rate, is 2.9%. Okay, the carbon tax, according to the Governor of Bank of Canada, at its current rate is 0.6% of that. The increase coming on April 1st, which is a 23% increase in the rate of the carbon tax, will add another 0.15. If you do the math and you calculate, you divide the numerator by the denominator, that's 26%, according to the Governor of Bank of Canada. This is a nonpartisan office. According to the Governor of Bank of Canada, we could reduce inflation by 26% by eliminating the carbon tax. And with respect to Mr. Blakey's comment with respect to who's benefiting from it, well, I can tell him that the most vulnerable in Northumberland, Peterborough South are barely making it by. There's been a doubling in the usage of food banks by children. And you know who gets hurt by the carbon tax? By people who have to pay. If you can't make it to the end of the month to feed your family, that's a huge issue, Mr. Blakey. It's a huge issue. And the carbon tax is taking tons of money. And we can talk about, Conservatives will always be open to reducing taxes. And so it's simple math. We could reduce inflation by 26% tomorrow by eliminating the carbon tax.
You, MP Lawrence. I don't think I have anybody else on the list. No? Okay. So I'll go to the clerk. You'll poll the members, please.
Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Mr. Kuzmierczyk. Mr. Kuzmierczyk is opposed.
Yep, opposed, yeah.
Mr. Weiler.
Opposed.
Madame Zerowitz.
Opposed.
Ms. Thompson.
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers.
In favor.
Mr. Halan.
In favor.
Mr. Lawrence.
En favor.
Mr. Morantz.
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Contre.
Mr. Blakey. Nays contre 7, yeas pour 4.
Okay, it's defeated. And now we'll get back to, I think, MP Allen, you have about a minute left. So.
I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Lawrence.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I just want to follow up with Mr. Halan. And I understand that Mr. Halan's questions, and I understand that there are framework, there are legislation, there are actions that have to be put in place. But presumably those actions are put in place to achieve results. And certainly in the private sector, if an investment is made, if a change is made, there's nearly always a calculation as to the return, what will be achieved. So with respect to the changes in the Fall Economic Statement Implementation Act, C-59, what can consumers expect in terms of a reduction in prices?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, for the question. And so because the Competition Act is premised as an enforcement action act, it's premised on the notion that the Competition Bureau will be awarded the tools to be able to combat actions within the marketplace that significantly lessen competition and choice for consumers. It's nearly impossible to predict what those actions the Bureau will then take action against within the marketplace, nor the behavior changes. But the premise of the proposals within the Act are such that by tightening the rules on anti-competitive activities and providing greater enforcement powers to the enforcer, that this will in fact increase competition, increase choice, and thereby lower prices for Canadians. But there's no number at which I can put with that.
Thank you. Now over to MP Zerowitz, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank everyone here today. I think often it takes a room where you see a lot of people here who've done really a lot of hard work to know that there's a heck of a lot of people working in our government doing really important work. So I just want to say huge thanks to all of you. I know all of you don't get a chance to speak today, but thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your hard work. Since our competition team is here, I might as well ask a question of them. I know that we've been working really hard as a government to try to improve our competition within Canada. And I know there's been elements in C56 in addition to C59 around modernizing our competition regime. If you could maybe talk to how the measures in C59 build on those measures that we've introduced in C56, which was, I believe, our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The question is correct in that we've made a number of important changes to the Competition Act over a series of legislative efforts, the first being in the Budget Implementation Act of the last budget, and then a set of further measures in C56, the Groceries and Affordability Act. That first set of changes was essentially a set of broad consensus-based measures. The grocery and affordability targeted a number of key pieces. One was competitor collaborations, so the degree to which the Bureau would have the capacity to look at collaborations in the marketplace, notably not necessarily those between competitors, but those in the value chain. Ended the efficiencies defense, so the reliance on the presumption of efficiencies as the basis for an uncompetitive merger or a merger that significantly lessened competition, and the introduction of a market study power with the capacity to compel information on the part of the commissioner. This proposition now adds to that in a number of ways. One is it allows the commissioner to be able to better use some of those other tools in mergers. Killer acquisitions is sort of one, which is the capacity to be able to have a longer look-back period, to be able to ensure that there's time to look at those transactions that might actually be really compelling, particularly in spaces like digital or innovation companies where it might be the acquisition by a very large player of a very small player that normally wouldn't be risk detection, but actually turns out to be very important for the structure of the business place. More mergers being notified, making a transaction irremediable, so essentially allowing for a transaction not to close until the merger actually has been considered by the Bureau. And then a number of others, including revamping the enforcement framework, so incentivizing private enforcement, giving more players within the marketplace access to the tribunal to be able to take on anti-competitive effects, noting that the Bureau has only certain capacities and sometimes a competitor might actually be best placed to understand the transaction and why it's significantly lessening competition. And then we've already talked about some of the greenwashing provisions and some of the ways in which there'll be enhanced powers there, but also clarifying that labor markets are actually relevant to a merger review in terms of the degree to which, if they're actually changing the skills basis by which an employer or a transaction might be impacting the worker composition, that actually is something, a factor that can be considered. And then there's a few housekeeping changes. But in sum, I think you'll see that the measures between the first two legislative efforts and then this last one really build out a comprehensive framework that gives the commissioner the powers, but also the scope to be able to look at the effects in the marketplace.
And, you know, when you're looking at competition, a lot of what's has been in the news has been around food prices. Mm-hmm. Is there anything in terms of just sort of the buildup of the improvements we're trying to make around Competition Act? How is it that it's going to someone in my riding of Davenport who was saying, well, Julie, my food prices still keep on going up. What is it that you're doing around sort of Competition Act or competition policy that it might actually have some sort of an impact on keeping things competitive within the marketplace and that overall having an impact on lowering prices?
So I think the biggest pieces around competition changes that have impacts on the grocery and food sector were in 56 for the most part, and the two there were, one, the competitor collaborations piece. We know that one of the factors that's potentially reducing competition is access to retail space, where there are restrictions between, for instance, landowners and grocery stores that prohibit the entry of new players within the retail footprint of the broader developer. And then the market study powers allow for the Bureau to be able to understand the particular dimensions, and sometimes that requires information that you would normally have to compel to ensure that it's actually accurate. And so both of those are important provisions. But I wouldn't undercut even some of the things like the killer acquisitions piece. There's been a ton of innovation in the food and grocery space, including around some of the direct-to-consumer aspects of that. And sometimes that's a function of buying up small companies that have some of those tools and widgets that become part and parcel. But if that becomes an act of dominance by which a player potentially then has the controls to be able to further hoard up their market share at the expense of competition in the marketplace, I think those are other elements that I would point to in terms of things that may impact the prices of the food for your constituents.
Thank you so much.
And now to MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, toujours dans les modifications.
Thank you. We're still discussing the amendments to the Competition Act. And I want to talk about repairability, specifically as concerns the automobile sector. People have to be able to get their cars repaired where they want. What we're seeing now is complaining will be complicated, but my question is also more specifically about the issue of clarity in the legislative framework. There's more clarity in the Right to Repair Act in the States and in Quebec. For example, in both cases, it says that manufacturers cannot hide information at the beginning. You know that diagnostics for cars are more and more difficult to access. They're often stored in the cloud. So why not deal with that by bringing in more clarity, as has been done in the United States and Quebec? Thank you, Chair, for the question. The whole questions of car repair, it's important to understand what tools are available to the government. It's not just the Competition Act. Why did the government deal with car repair issue? Well, first of all, there were bills that are now before the House dealing with copyright to be able to access aspects which are protected by copyright, including the car software. And that's one of the things that's important to ensure that a consumer has the ability to have their car repaired. Changes in this bill represent a different tool, the potential role of the Competition Act. And here, the idea is to address the lack of access of a few more important tools for car repair, such as market access. This is the issue of the Competition Act. So in this case, it's only if an operator prevents another competitor, that's against the law. There are some aspects that are also important to clarify when it comes to the right to repair. But perhaps this is more in the domain of other jurisdictions.
Comparing Canadian law, for instance, with some of what you might have seen around right to repair in certain provinces or potentially in certain states in particular, they have a much broader federal jurisdiction than the potentially that we have here. And so what we've done is attacked it through the mechanisms that are the primary levers we have. Et ça, c'est vraiment le droit d'auteur et aussi.
And that's really copyright and this aspect of the Competition Act, because the Competition Act is really to regulate markets and to when it comes to minimization of competition in the marketplace. And that's why we gave this revision regarding a failure to provide. Thank you, MP Sainte-Marie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have some questions about Division 7. Post-secondary educational institutions. You guys too? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
So my question is this. I mean, I think one of the things that was quite concerning in the example of Laurentian University, and my colleague, of course, Charlie Angus and Carol Hughes have done a lot of work on this, and the fallout was that, you know, the CCAA was being used for a public institution, and it seemed that part of the motivation for that was to get around good faith bargaining and get out of their collective agreement commitments. So, you know, that's something that can happen presumably with other public institutions outside of the post-secondary education institution space. So I'm wondering if government has looked at what it would take to be able to apply provisions like this more generally, so that we don't have to suffer another example in order to move to prevent this kind of bad faith engagement with employees. We saw something, under the Harper government, they created Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, and we saw workers get pushed out of their pension plan, for example, and that was, not quite a public entity that was created, and those employees were moved from a public entity into this kind of amorphous organization that wasn't quite private and wasn't quite public. So, what else can and should we be doing in order to avoid workers getting screwed when governments decide they don't want to live up to their commitments?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for the question. And I'll try and avoid talking about the multiple tools in the toolkit again, but I will in one sense. One is, in this particular instance, what we've essentially done is allowed for the regulations to be able to set out an institutional category that would not have access to the CCAA for the purposes of an orderly wind-up. That definition will be set out in the regulations and then will be added to, and so there is context and capacity for the government to potentially augment or consider other entities that might need to live within that regulatory structure. We'd probably have to come back legislatively to think about other categories, but generally speaking, the regulations will set out what we mean by what we're talking about when we talk about a publicly funded institution. Because I think in many of these cases we do need to be thoughtful about the marketplace out there, about why these people wouldn't have access to an orderly wind-up, because there are certain protections actually in place under the CCAA that we would want to afford in other cases that potentially would benefit from a CCAA. I do think in the context, though, of other protections, I think this is part of the rationale for which we've done a number of other things in this space, changes to the Pension Benefit Standards Act, that's not me, but my colleagues in finance, but also the changes that we've made to the bankruptcy proceedings itself in terms of some of those considerations for other organizations or groups, including labor and including as it relates to pension rights. And then things like what we've done under the Canada Business Corporations Act, where a federally incorporated corporation is under obligation to report back on a regular basis as it relates to the treatment of their workers and pensioners. So there are other protections, particularly for the types of kind of transformational aspects that you're talking about. But as it relates to bankruptcy itself and the access to the CCAA, the test is size, and then the second piece will be then determined in the regulations.
Thank you. And yeah, that's the time. So we're off to MP Chambers now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll stay with Mr. Shan if I can. On greenwashing, very interested. It seems like it's a fairly narrow provision, but I want to pose a question to see if it might be captured. For financial products, that investment firms, mutual funds, ETFs, and asset managers promote as ESG or saving the world by investing through green, but then it turns out that their highest holdings happen to be in oil and gas companies or other extractive sectors or tobacco companies. Would the new powers give you the ability, or the Bureau the ability, to examine that element of the financial services sector?
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Insofar as there's a technical claim being made about the product in question, so in this case, if it's a technical claim about an environmental standard that's being offered in relation to the product, so in this case, if it was an ETF that potentially made a very technical claim on an environmental basis that said not just some generalized kind of, but for which a test would exist, like are you investing or not investing in the clean energy or some sort of greener sector of the economy, then it would afford the commissioner the capacity to be able to evaluate whether or not the test was actually being sufficiently reported back to the consumer. If it's a broader claim, then that's not within the scope of this particular provision.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to stay on this for a second because it's very important. Most of the asset management flows over the last 5 years have actually gone to companies when they slap on the label ESG to their funds. They're making claims that by doing so, by choosing to invest there, you're saving the planet. I will editorialize and say it's a scam. And I hope that you'll consider putting the financial services companies on notice that you may be able to capture them for their claims and what they're telling investors about what they can do by just saying, and there's multiple entities that do ESG ratings, and they would say, yes, this is high. So if someone promotes the fact that they have a high ESG rating, and it turns out that they aren't really doing that, I would hope that you're going to examine those cases.
So 2 comments, Mr. Chair. One, so as it notes, this provision reverses the onus on who needs to make representations related to the claim in the marketplace. And so this, if it's a technical standard and they're relating claims related to the technical standard, it reverses the onus. And so the entity in place, whether it was a financial company or otherwise, would need to be able to prove that they were meeting the technical standard to the point, the position of the Bureau. Deceptive marketing provisions do apply more generally without the necessity, but the onus is in reverse for the claims for which there isn't a technical standard in place. The other is this does relate to the broader effort underway on financial climate disclosure information reporting as it relates to a whole series of both financial and other entities about how they report on both their GHG reduction commitments and their broader ESG claims. And that very much is not the purview of the Competition Act, but the purview of my financial colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shane. I'm going to run out of time here. And just to save some folks getting up and around, I'm going to request that we be able to submit questions in writing, as we have done before. I think that's fairly reasonable, because I don't think it's fair to ask the Treasury Board Secretariat individuals, Ms. McLean and Ms. Labrie, because I think it's out of their scope, but I think it's in their department. We often get large legislation that's sent here without telling parliamentarians how many people are required to implement the new programs. I ask it every single time, come to committee, and it's great to have a large group here, but it's all siloed off, and it's unclear to me who's actually looking at the people plan in the Government of Canada. So that's a request we're going to make in writing. Mr. Marion, for the payments, I'm wondering if there's a briefing note you could share with the committee or some analysis on transaction costs, in particular for e-transfers. My understanding is it costs pennies to actually do the e-transfer, but that banks charge $3. I don't care how much fraud is in the system. That's a pretty good profit margin. So you don't need to answer. Would just love you to share any analysis you have on that. And I believe my colleague has a question about the water agency, and we'll follow up about the water agency in Winnipeg. Thank you very much.
Actually at time, MP Chambers, but if you do have a question, MP Morantz, if you could just put that also in writing, and we could put that out. Thank you, and I apologize for that. And yeah, all those what was captured in terms of the questions that were asked, MP Chambers, we'll get those out to the officials. We have MP Thompson. You'll be our last questioner for our officials today.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for the last questions. You need to do musical chairs again, because Mr. Heath, if you could come forward, I just want to go back to the conversation on the housing and the departmental change, and I want to begin by referencing last week while I was in my riding of St. John's East, we were able to announce the Accelerator Fund, which I was so pleased. It took some time, but it really showed the collaboration and also the complexity of the housing strategy and being able to work with municipalities to really break down some of the barriers that have been a challenge especially in housing, building homes at the most vulnerable entry points. So if you wouldn't mind, just go back to the points that you were discussing when we ran out of time, specifically on the implementation of the policy, which I presume is around the National Housing Strategy, and also that framework, and why having the department infrastructure and community linked, how it really is able to expand a strategy that understands this is not a linear conversation, but really is quite complex and requires multiple supports.
Thanks very much for the question. And indeed, the Housing Accelerator Fund is being implemented right now with a number of municipalities signing on. The target for that program is 100,000 units, and its uptake has been quite positive. And then the National Housing Strategy, turning to another thing that is not in the legislation per se, but that it is part of the government's policy and program delivery on housing. The National Housing Strategy is an $82 billion group of programs and initiatives over 10 years that aims to put in place 160,000 new housing units, to renovate 300,000 units, and to lift 530,000 Canadian families out of core housing need. And the departmental legislation, by really joining housing with infrastructure and communities, provides for really does enhance the ability for the government to receive advice from the public service that connects things that are intrinsically connected. What is, how do you build housing? You need infrastructure. That's one of the key ingredients. And you need to make sure that the people who are in that housing have access to transportation so that they can get to their jobs, and that relies on transit, among other things. So putting these things together allows for the interconnection of programming, allows for infrastructure funding to have housing considerations and occasionally housing conditions brought in. And really does, I think, put us on a solid footing for future programs as they are implemented and rolled out.
And thank you for that. I really did want to have that part of the record because I think it is quite forward-thinking. And I'm sorry, more musical chairs. I have a couple of minutes left. So I wanted to just switch to something that is close to my heart, the nursing that's still present in my work life, the amendments to tobacco and vaping. I'm not sure who here is able to speak to that. Thank you. A very simple question. The fees or charges that are paid to the tobacco and vaping product manufacturers, do they recover the full cost of the Canada's tobacco control strategy?
Question, Mr. Chair. So within Canada's tobacco strategy, the government expends $66 million every year for those activities. So the first step in being able to recover those fees are these proposed legislative amendments, because it would then allow the setup of the tobacco and vaping cost recovery frameworks. So that's the first step. And then there are several steps following that would take place, which would include consultations on what a fee proposal would look like, what eligible activities would be considered, and so forth. And then it would be at that time that we could then go forward with regulations, and the amounts at that point would be clarified.
Thank you. What are the circumstances that would allow the Minister of Health to remit all or part of the fee or charge?
Could you clarify that question, please,
Yeah,
terms of what?
Are there any circumstances where the Minister of Health would remit some of the charges or the fees?
Or so there's a component, and if my colleague wanted to elaborate on that further, if there was an error in the calculation, for example, then there would be the ability within the authorities to be able to provide money back to the manufacturer if there was a calculation error, for example. So those provisions are in place.
That is the time, MP Thompson, and thank you. And we want to thank our very knowledgeable and hardworking officials that have answered many questions here for us today. I know you're going to answer more because we're going to be sending you some emails. And I know that, MP Blakey, you've got your hand up. Also want to say just to members while I have you here, so we have talked about how hardworking our clerk is here, and he's the best clerk on the Hill, and to help our clerk when it comes to witnesses. So as we get into C-59, I'm asking members to be able to get those first preliminary list of witnesses to the clerk by let's just say Tuesday of Tuesday. Would that work of next week? Okay, of next week, Tuesday. Okay, so Tuesday, get that list, please. That helps so the clerk can reach out to them and we can have them all prepped and ready to be able to come before committee. So thank you for that. And now, Danby Blakey, just before we conclude.
Yeah, just a quick question. You may recall, I think it was last day, I had moved a motion on actually doubling the GST rebate and a national school nutrition program. So we didn't come back to that. And so I just wanted to let you know that I'll be following up with you, Mr. Chair, and the clerk to figure out how that comes back on the agenda, because the meeting was adjourned, debate on the motion wasn't adjourned. And I just wanted to lay a marker down that I am still very much interested in that question. I know Mr. Lawrence expressed an enthusiasm for voting for tax relief, so I'm sure he'll want to support the motion. And I'd hate, therefore, to not have it come back to the table expeditiously. So I'll be following up with you on that issue, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, MP Blakey. And yeah, so shall we adjourn, members? Yeah, okay, we're adjourned.